Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this month's webinar on Work Less and Flow More, where we'll be going through Workflow, Laserfiche Workflow. So a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar will be recorded and available for viewing on our Cities Digital or CDI client portal, along with a few helpful resources in developing and generating your workflows from here. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please don't hesitate to type them into the chat in your GoToWebinar screen. And then after the presentation is complete, I'll go through and address any additional questions that were asked. Also, if you stay through the entire webinar today, a little bit later on, I will be asking for some feedback, and the first 5 people to participate will qualify and receive a free CPP class of their choice. That's the Laserfiche's certified partner program, and you can go ahead and we'll send you a list and you can choose the class you'd like. So let's get started. So today we're going to go over what workflow is, what it can do. We're going to run through the Laserfiche Workflow Designer, where you can build and configure workflows on your own. We can review some of the frequently used activities within the designer so you have a better understanding of all of the different things that you can configure when you are building a workflow. And then we can get ideas for how activities can be used. Those activities can be used in your organization. We'll build an email notification workflow. I've been wanting this email notification workflow internally for a long time, so I'm excited to be doing this webinar where I'll actually get a chance to implement it. And then we'll explore some other automation that CDI uses internally, and we'll just take a look at a few screenshots and talk through some of the flows on what we have set up, and then just review other ideas and then the question that I shoot out to you. So hopefully, if you don't know already, what is Laserfiche Workflow? Workflow is really the glue that holds together an ECM solution. It allows you to automate routine tasks within your organization while being flexible enough to handle the unexpected. So you can set up a workflow for any manual process that your team has. For instance, if you receive a document, a paper document on your desk that you need to fill out, and then you have to give it to the next person for approval, and then they have to give it to the next person for approval. And then it has to eventually get scanned and archived somewhere. Or maybe it's just placed in a hanging file folder in a room in the dungeon, nowhere to be found again. Laserfiche can help you automate and streamline all of that. So we can take that manual process and convert it to a completely digitized, automated process within Laserfiche. So a couple of examples of frequently used workflows that we see kind of across the board, and this is with some of the newer implementations that we come across. These are some of the more frequent ones that we've been seeing lately. So a lot of contract management, vendor management, and approvals, tying that into your CRMs, tying it into your HRIS, tying it into maybe your finance software, whatever you need. A lot of contract management, digital signatures as well. And then employee onboarding. Laserfiche has really come a long way. So anything having to do with employee onboarding or employee management, you can automate within Laserfiche. New client business, public records requests, we've been seeing this very frequently. And then accounts payable and invoicing routing solutions, and then marketing review. I mean, these are just a couple of the ideas to get you started. So again, workflow will allow you to automate any manual process in your office. Not only can you use workflow on its own, but you can also use workflow in conjunction with Laserfiche forms, so you can digitize that paper form and then route it around with workflow and Laserfiche forms. So you may be wondering, am I licensed for workflow? Well, that's a loaded question, and it depends on which platform you're on. So here's just a quick start guide. So if you've got Avante, Rio, or subscription licensing, yes, you have workflow. If you have a older version of Laserfiche and you're on Team or United, you might have Workflow. Workflow was not bundled into that platform, but was available or is available as a separate system add-on. So if you're not sure, you can always reach out to the sales@citiesdigital.com team and we will help you identify whether or not you've got Workflow on your system. So jumping into Workflow. So Workflow, the component itself, has three separate modules or components. There's the Workflow Designer, and that's what you would interact with the most. This is where you're going to build your workflows, you're going to set up your definitions, you're going to do all of your configuration and design in the Workflow Designer. So the Workflow Server and the Workflow Subscriber are components that get set up initially when you are deploying Workflow, and chances are once they're set up, you won't have to have any interaction with them. So in order to have access to the Workflow Designer, you have to be given the appropriate permissions by your IT team. And if you're not sure if you have Workflow installed or you're not sure if you have permissions and you eventually want to get permissions, again, you can reach out to the sales@citiesdigital.com team and we will reach out and help you get everything configured and set up as part of your support. All right, so let's dive in and see where the magic happens. Today, during my demonstration, we are just going to go through the Workflow Designer, so I do not have a lot of slides for you today. You're welcome. And we are going to be looking at the Workflow Designer 10.4, which is the latest version of Laserfiche. So, during my technical difficulties, I got kicked out, but here we are. Here's the Workflow Designer. When you are logging into the Designer, it's just an application that typically resides on a server. You can also install the Workflow Designer application on your desktop if you would prefer. So when we open the Workflow Designer, here's the view that you typically see. So there's, again, kind of three main panes within the Workflow Designer. We've got the toolbox, which houses all of our different Laserfiche activities. And I counted today because I was curious to see how many activities were actually available. And there are over 100 out-of-the-box Laserfiche workflow activities. So when we talk about how you can really automate any process within your organization, we really mean it. There's over 100 out-of-the-box tools, but then there's also the ability to add in custom scripting. And then there's additional custom activities that have been developed by the CDI team or that come with integrations that you may have or that you may be wanting. So the toolbox is where you can find all of your activities. And then here in the middle is our rule manager and also our designer pane. So once I start designing a new workflow, I'll click the new workflow button. This will pop up the designer pane for us so we can see it right here. Then we're just going to drag and drop activities over there, which we will do. And then here, the final column or section of the Workflow Designer is the Properties pane. And this is what walks you through what you need to configure as you drag and drop toolbox activities into your designer pane. The properties will reflect what you need to configure as part of that activity. So it's very intuitive. And Laserfiche leveraging workflow doesn't require a ton of extensive IT knowledge or anything like that. This is something that once you've got some training on and once you've had a little hands-on experience with it, something you can maintain and manage and build yourselves. And if you're not interested in doing that, you can certainly reach out to the CDI team, and our team is more than equipped to help you configure and build and set up your Laserfiche system with workflow. So going back to the toolbox, within the toolbox, you can see here there are multiple different tools within the system or different categories. So we've got our frequently used, routing activities, Laserfiche actions. And if we just go ahead and click the plus to expand, we can take a look at all of the activities associated with that. So I'm not going to go through all 100 plus toolbox activities. I'm just going to go through some of the frequently used and then touch on some of the others. So today when we do the custom workflow build, I'm going to email out a document. And so this email tool is just as it sounds. At any step in your workflow process, if you want somebody to get an email notification with a document attached, or an email notification with a hyperlink to a document, or a hyperlink to a folder, or an email where they can approve a document, this is the tool that you would use. Email can be configured in a few different ways, like I had mentioned. So sending documents, sending folders, just a notification, a lot of different things. Retrieving field values. So retrieving field values tool is for getting the metadata that's associated with the document in Laserfiche, and it allows us to retrieve and take those field values from the initial submission in Laserfiche and then use those in different areas of the workflow. So retrieving field values, again, when somebody adds a document maybe into your intake folder and you want to set up a client file or an auto file workflow, you would retrieve the field values so that we can say, okay, the document came in with the template of new client and it's a billing document. And so we want to file it in that client's billing folder. Retrieving field values will allow you to do that. So a routing decision, this runs the first branch that is satisfied condition. So a routing decision will allow you to decide who you want to route documents to, whether it's a specific person or a group of people, something like that. So a routing decision really gives you a lot of flexibility to configure where you want your activity to go and what you want to happen to it. So you can route documents, you can just route notifications, you can, anything like that. So you can route documents to folders, to groups, to specific users. Here, if we do find entry, so let's say somebody kicks off a new employee packet. So we're getting ready to send out a job offer to one of our team members. And as we do that, we also send out some standardized documentation on our benefits. So we can find our benefits packet within our Laserfiche repository and build the find entry so we can find those benefits documents, and then we can pair that with an email, and then we can send that directly to our applicant as part of the standard process. So you don't have to think about, okay, did I hire or did I send them everything they needed in advance, or did it just automatically get kicked off? So that's something that find entry would allow you to do. Wait for entry change. So this will make the workflow pause until something has happened. So again, let's think of if we have invoices that are ready to be reviewed. The invoices get added into Laserfiche, and then somebody has to go through and look at the invoices, and then something happens from there. So once the invoices are reviewed, maybe somebody adds a custom stamp or a tag or a metadata field that says they've been approved. When the document gets updated, this wait for entry change will allow the workflow to continue on throughout its process. So you don't have to create a separate workflow for every single piece of your flow. You can configure the wait for entry change so that you can build larger workflows and have more routing decisions and trees as part of it. So route entry to a folder. This allows you to just send a particular document to some other folder. Again, this could be paired with the wait for entry change so that, once they hit approve, it gets filed away into the client file, something like that. Create an entry. So this would be something that if you wanted to create a new folder or document in Laserfiche. So if you are, again, maybe doing client onboarding and the client's folder doesn't exist in Laserfiche currently, you can create that folder structure automatically. Or let's say you're getting ready to plan for your monthly minutes and you've got your agenda packet all created, and your standard process is to create the folder structure and maybe subfolder structure for the minutes and the resolutions, but that doesn't exist yet. Well, if you build a workflow and use create entry, it can create that standardized folder structure or subfolder structure for you automatically. Assign field values. This tool allows you to assign field values to a document that's been added into the system if you want. So going back to our invoice processing workflow, the way that it is set up for us here internally at CDI, which we'll kind of brief over in a little bit as well, is our invoices get snapshotted, Laserfiche snapshotted into our repository from our QuickBooks system. And they just get snapshotted and no template is applied, they just get snapshotted into a folder. And when they're added to that folder, we have a workflow that kicks off and assigns field values. So it will apply a whole template and standard static fields to kick off the workflow process so that even if we don't apply a template, one gets applied for us so that the workflow can continue on throughout its course. So you can assign field values at any point if it's not something that you want to require your team members to automatically populate or require your team members to manually populate when they bring it into the system. Assign token values. I know that a month ago or so, the consulting team had done a webinar on leveraging tokens. So tokens are what allow you to apply a specific name to a document based on the metadata that came in. So again, you are adding a building permit process and you assign a building permit number and it's associated with a particular parcel ID and it was sent in on a specific date. So you can leverage this assign token values to automatically name that permit by the permit number and the date that it was created, or the permit number and any other token values that you want to leverage. It could be maybe if it was done by an internal user, you could leverage their name or again dates, whatever you want from there. And then the for each entry allows you to run activities for each document within a folder without having to kick off the workflow multiple times. So if you add a whole bunch of documents into a folder and you've got a workflow monitoring it, you can have it go through and say, for each entry, I want to make these changes. So you have the ability to run workflow on groups or collections of entries that were added into the repository. So those are just a few of the frequently used ones that we have. But otherwise, there's also additional routing activities. So folders, groups, or users you can route your documents or information to. Laserfiche actions. So these are some really fun ones. You can add sticky notes. You can add text boxes for adding text, stamps. And again, these annotation type of activities or actions are just overlays on the original documents. So you're not making changes to the original documents. But this could be an action notification too. So if somebody, as part of the workflow, you want it to wait for an entry change and you want them to be able to apply their approval stamp, Once they apply that approval stamp, then the workflow again can continue on down. You can attach an electronic document. So as part of your workflow, if you're sending out that email and you want to attach an electronic document, you can most certainly do that. You can also create links back to documents within your repository through Laserfiche. We can do mail merge type of processes within Laserfiche. So if you've got a standardized paper document right now, and you want somebody to be able to digitally complete that within Laserfiche, we can leverage the metadata or text on a document to fill out a fillable PDF or a fillable Word document. So you have the ability to use tools like that. We can retrieve version history. So if you've got a workflow where team members are getting notifications to collaborate on a Word document, maybe it's your agenda process again, you can apply versioning to that document, and as each person signs off on their section or gives their approval to the agenda, and you want to review the action or retrieve the version history on that document, this is what would allow you to do that as part of the workflow automatically. So you could keep all of that together. It is all together, but as part of the workflow, maybe you want to email it to somebody. You can also now, with Laserfiche version 10.4, set records management properties. So records management is a whole nother ball game, which I'm not going to go into today, but if you're newer to Laserfiche and you are leveraging workflow and you are looking for a really simple, easy way to apply records series to your documents based on maybe document type or something, you can now set that up within workflow. So we'll take a look at maybe some of the metadata tools. So again, you can assign tags to your documents automatically. So if a particular user, maybe the company president, is adding a document into the repository and they do it so infrequently that you know that they're adding a really confidential document into the system. They push it into the intake form, intake folder in Laserfiche. Workflow sees that new document added. It automatically applies maybe a security tag and then auto files it away appropriately based on the rest of the metadata information. So you could assign tags. You could delete document signatures. So if you had an electronic signature applied to your document, you could delete that if you wanted, or you can send it out for signature. We also do have DocuSign integrated workflow activities. So if you want to, as part of your document flow, send a document out via DocuSign for signature, we can set those up as well. Flow control, these are really good ones because a lot of times your documents get routed from one person to the next, but it's not necessarily in any specific order, and it can vary depending on what happens. So with these flow control activities, you have the ability to set deadlines or escalation. So if somebody's out, it can be escalated to the next person in line, so it continues on throughout the process. You can do conditional parallels. So, you know, if it's happening with one user and another user at the same time, they can be run at the same time. And then this can all be based on something that happens. So if somebody changes the metadata field or they select who they want to route it to, you have the ability to then route it to somebody else each time. So you can set up conditional parallels, routing decisions, all of that. Repeating, again, this can repeat on entries, files, rows, users, values, and you can do the same thing over and over until your workflow has been completed. We use repeating in our invoice process because, again, it gets snapshotted into our Laserfiche repository as one giant TIFF image with like 30 pages or more. And then we run a workflow that goes through and it repeats the same process and it removes pages from that TIFF image and creates a new document from that TIFF image, and then applies metadata by just reading and extracting the text from the page, and then auto files it away into the appropriate client folder. So information gathering. So we can find entries. So this would be using the entry ID on a specific document. So any document that gets added into the Laserfiche system, it gets assigned an entry ID. And so we can find a specific entry ID, or we can find entries within a certain folder, groups of users, managers, anything like that. So you have the ability to find whatever you want in the Laserfiche system too. Again, you have the ability to use tokens within Laserfiche. So you can use tokens to create standardized formatting on some of your fields that come into the system. If they're not manually typed in, you can use the token creator for that. Or you can use tokens to populate, a date so that it automatically applies the date to the name of the document, even though that may not be captured in the metadata. So there are a ton of different activities in here. Another little section that I want to just kind of go over is the Laserfiche forms workflow activities. So Laserfiche is set up now where forms and workflow can really interact pretty tightly with each other. There will be coming changes later this year, early next year, to workflow and forms. But essentially, if you are leveraging Laserfiche forms and you want to push a document into the repository for storage, but then invoke a forms process to kick off once maybe something's happened in the repository, you can have them talk back and forth to each other. You can do enterprise integration tools. So this would be more like custom scripting, looking outside of your Laserfiche repository, updating a Word document. There's tools for Exchange, tools for SharePoint. So again, lots of workflow activities available in here. All right, so let's go ahead and build that process. So I'm just going to open up my repository here. So this is our Cities Digital repository. And in the sales folder, we have sales process documentation for some of our processes. And whenever team members submit new documents for review, I don't ever know unless they happen to tell me. And so I want to build a quick email notification that goes out to me every time somebody adds something into this for review folder. So to start there, and again, this is a very simple workflow, but I just want to show you some of the things that you can do. So I know that I want it to email me. It's going to email me when a new document is added. So there are a couple parts to building a workflow, and there are some considerations that you have to make when you're building a workflow, which I think is a whole nother separate topic, but you'll need to map out what you want your process to be. In this particular case, I know that I just want an email. I want an email when somebody adds a new document to that folder so that I can review it and then we can file it away. So I'm going to use the email activity. We can see here when we drag and drop our activities, it then gives us this notification icon saying you've got something you have to do. So if I go over here to the properties pane, it's just going to walk me through how I need to configure this email. So who do I want to send it to? Send it to myself. What do I want my message subject to be? So we are going to have this be process review email notification. And I want to attach something. So in this particular case, I want to be able to just attach that document. So if you click the attach button, you can see here that there's the 3 dots, which indicates more. So you can see what you want your attachment type to be. I want it to just be the entry that gets added. Do I want it to be the document or the folder? And I just want it to be the document. You can go ahead and click Properties to see more. So the attachment name comes in as whatever they called it. Do I want a shortcut? Do I want a copy of the document? I just want a shortcut because I'm going to go into Laserfiche and make the edits anyway. So I'm just going to leave all of that as is. And then click OK. So we can see here it added my starting entry, and that will be attached when my email gets sent out. And then in the body of my email, we're just going to say, somebody submitted some new documentations for our sales processes. Please review the document, and that's it. So pretty simple. I could set the priority, high, medium, low, whatever I want to do. You can do advanced configuration. You can customize your emails within here. So if you wanted to add tables of information, you could certainly do that with the HTML editor and all of that. So I'm just going to take a look, make sure that's all set up right. And it looks like it is. So I'm going to go ahead and, in order to add a starting entry, the workflow must, since I had this open, I did not start that. So that's another great thing to mention is that when you are configuring your workflows, you do have to have a connection profile. Again, this is something that is done usually once your workflow engine and tools have been installed. You would build a connection profile, and the connection profile is what allows us to identify that, okay, this is an action that can actually happen. Here's the credentials. They have access to all these particular things. Let's make this happen. So now we can see, since we've added our connection profile, our email went away, or our notification on our email activity has gone. Additionally, since I missed this step originally, there are some best practices that you want to watch for when you're building a workflow. So right now my workflow is named workflow 3. I don't think that makes sense. So we have our workflow names indicated by department, and then a brief line of what it is. And then you can put in an additional description to help you identify it. We really recommend that you be as descriptive with your descriptions as possible, so that, you know, when somebody else comes into your Laserfiche system or looks at your workflows, they know what's happening with this. So sends Laura an email. You build your connection profile. I'm not going to make this workflow a business process. A business process allows you to add instructions as part of your workflow process, so that as it goes from person to person, they can get some instructions on what they're supposed to do and what's supposed to happen next, as well as a business process allows you to kick off the workflow on demand right from your repository. We don't need that because I just want this to kick off when a new document is added. All right, so now we can go ahead and publish our workflow. It's very simple, again, just sending an email. So it says no starting rules. Well, what's a starting rule? A starting rule is what tells workflow when to invoke the particular process. So we can either add a condition. A condition would be something like, start this workflow when a document is added, or when a document is changed, something like that. Or you can schedule it. So if you want workflow to query your system and OCR the documents, every night at 10, you can schedule a workflow to kick off at a specific time frame or interval. Or you could say no, and then you could come in here and run it manually. So I'm going to go ahead and set up a condition. And so that brings you to the rule wizard. So again, we started with, all right, I know that I want an email as part of this workflow process when a document is added. And so now we just have to work through how does Laserfiche get this notification. So the event type is going to be entry created. There are multiple options for you to choose from. So you could have a workflow kicked off when something's deleted, when it's moved, copy, changed, all of these. I want to go ahead and just do when an entry is created in that folder. I want it to send me that document. And then the workflow kicks off if all of these conditions are true. So this is where, those if and statements come into play. So I want it to be a document, and then I want it to be added into a specific folder. Because right now, as it lies, this isn't really giving me much. So it's saying when an entry is created, send Laura an email. I don't want an email for every document that gets created or added into the Laserfiche system. That would be very overwhelming. So I want to have it kick off when the entry is added to a specific folder path. Then I'm going to go ahead and say equals. So again, you have multiple options here. So you could set equals, does not equal, greater than, less than, depending on what type of workflow you're trying to configure. Again, you have lots of options. So I'm going to go ahead and click the More button and then navigate to the folder I want this to kick off in. So I'm going to go into my sales folder, process documentation for review. And then you want it to have the folder open so that you know it's going to land on the appropriate one. So I'm just going to click OK. You can verify your folder path. And then I'm going to publish this. My rule has been published successfully. So we can go ahead and finish. So now let's test it out and make sure it worked. Let's knock on wood, everyone. So I'm just going to pull up my Laserfiche repository. So again, for review, I'm just going to grab any old document. I apparently have. All right, so I'm just dragging a document from my desktop into my repository here. I usually remove the generate searchable text or generate pages. We don't specifically care whether or not a document is a PDF or a TIFF file, and I'm just going to delete it out after this demo anyway, since it's not really a process. And generating text, I would recommend keeping it on, but if you do remove it, you could also run processes to OCR your documents after hours. But if you leave it on, it does take some resources and time to extract the text from your document, and depending on how long it is, it could take a little while. Then I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. So I added a new document in. Now I'm going to just pull up my email. Do a little refresh here. It worked. I love when things work. So today, 7:25 at 1:45 p.m., I got my process review email notification. Here's the document or the email body that I had typed in, and then a link back to my document. So if I were not in Laserfiche, I would be able to just click the link and it would open Laserfiche and bring me right to this document. So that's configuring a super simple workflow email notification that goes out. All right, so now I'm going to jump back to the slideshow. And we're just going to talk about a couple of the other internal processes that we do here at Cities Digital. So I have just a couple screenshots, and I just kind of wanted to talk through what these workflows do. A lot of these have been demonstrated in previous webinars, which you could or have access to through our Cities Digital or CDI YouTube channel or within our CDI client portal. So we are using Laserfiche Workflow to manage our invoice review process. So we have invoices that we send out to our client base, and they are all generated within our finance software, but our finance software does not allow us any approval process. The invoice gets generated and then it can just go out. But we needed to put some checks and balances into that process to have another couple set of eyes look at these invoices prior to them getting distributed out to all of our clients. So we built a workflow. So before any of our invoices go out to our customers, what we do is we snapshot them into Laserfiche into a specific folder in Laserfiche, and then Workflow picks it up. It assigns field values, and then it notifies the appropriate team members that they have invoices that they need to review. Then they get a link to the document that's been snapshotted into the system, and they can make their notes. And then once they hit approve, again, Workflow is set up so that it will take the pages out of that multi-page document, separate each invoice into its own Laserfiche document in the system. It will assign the client name. It will assign, additional metadata information like the invoice number, the date, due date, any of that information that we want to collect. And then the workflow will be invoking for each entry multiple times until that multi-page document turns into a 0-page document. And then from there, it will delete that 0-page document out of our system, and we'll be left with 30 separate documents, all with completed metadata. And then from there, Workflow grabs them again, and it will auto-file them into the appropriate client folder, into their billing folder. And then when it's in the billing folder has metadata information applied that identifies whether or not that customer wants to receive an email notification with that bill or if they want it printed. And if they want it emailed, it automatically generates an email that is sent off to them, or it goes into a queue for printing and we send it out that way. So that process, completely automated. If we would have had to print everything or have our approvers go into the system and find each invoice for review and then approve it and then maybe print it, it would have been very cumbersome. And so Laserfiche Workflow really helped us streamline that. So another process that we do internally is new project documentation. So every time we have a new process or a new project that kicks off with one of our clients, we fill out actually a Laserfiche form. So once that form is submitted, it goes to our project coordinator and she assigns it out. And then once she assigns it out, the submission gets stored into the Laserfiche repository, and Workflow picks it up and creates a new project folder, and then standardized documentation for all of our projects based on whether it's a Laserfiche implementation, a small project, a large project, an audit request, workflow audit, a demo. So it will create standardized documentation in our repository automatically for us. So if it's an implementation, it blasts all of our standardized training materials, maybe the statement of work, all of that, so that we don't have to go find it again, do a save as. It just gives us the document. And then we also use our client files autofile. We have a client files autofile. We also have an HR autofile. We have a couple different autofiles within our system to just send everything away appropriately. So here's just a screenshot of what our folder structure looks like. So any document that gets added into our repository that is client related, it has a template applied called client files. And then within that template, it identifies what type of document it is, whether, and then from there, any additional information on the document. So if it's a contract, is it a new Laserfiche contract? Is it just a service contract? it identifies all of that. And then again, I just kind of want to point out here, you'll see that our contracts folder is red. So you can set up your templates to be different colors to help you identify what's happening with your folder structure without necessarily having to go into it. So contracts here is telling us, and it's red, it's telling us that there is a contract that is contained in there, and that's exciting. So the client files, auto files, is really easy. We just add a couple metadata fields into the document to the document when we add it into Laserfiche, and then Workflow picks it up and auto files it, renames it, and then we have access to it within the system. So Laserfiche Workflow can really help you transform your business just with the enforcing standardized naming conventions. Something I always like to point out as part of using Workflow and getting standardization within your system is, you have your full users configured. Your full users, assuming they have access, can add documents maybe into any of those folders. But if you really want to get standardization out of your Laserfiche system, you can have them or allow them only the ability to add documents into an intake file, which requires them to add a template, populate a couple of fields, and then from there it will auto-file into the appropriate folder. That's how you get total standardization across your system, so that people aren't just willy-nilly adding documents into folders trying to bypass your standardization. So you can get, really nitty-gritty with that, or you can set it up however you want. And then with it, again, you can send documents out for digital signature, all of that. So the last couple slides here are just a few ideas on automation and things that you can do within your system with workflow and or forms. So human resources, really anything with human resources. We definitely have Laserfiche set up internally here at Cities Digital to replace the need for an HRIS program. You can even do things like your hours tracking and scheduling, all of that within here. So again, job requisition requests, approvals, posting it out to those job sites, applicant reviews. You can set up a process to compare the different applicants to one another. Payroll change requests, benefits or COBRA enrollments, new hire setup and configuration, the whole onboarding gamut, as well as anything you need to do with an employee throughout their tenure with your system or with your team, and then through termination as well. Additionally, here's just a few other ideas. These are just things I pulled together a list. So building permits, inspection requests, business and liquor licensing, task assignments. So if you assign something out to a person on a regular basis, like take action on this when Jan comes in, you can create an automatic process within Laserfiche to have task assignments. I know this one has been really popular in our government sector, the election judge registration, agenda management, voter registration, procurement, public records requests again, client onboarding, NIGO, IGO, suitability, invoicing. Really, the options are endless. So here's where I ask my question. And the first 5 people to either tell me what their favorite workflow is within their organization or an idea for a workflow that they have now will get contacted by me after this webinar and receive a free CPP class. So I'm going to give it a minute, and I'm hoping everybody will take a second to type in a question in the chat box, and then I'll go through and take a look at what everybody has submitted. New client onboarding. I like that suggestion. We have a would love to implement invoice processing. So even though that seems like such a simple process, actually, whenever I tell Patrick that I want to show that and demonstrate it, it seems really simple, but you don't get approval processing in your finance software a lot of times, and that's probably one of my favorites internally here at Cities Digital. Have a new employment application move through approval or denial with onboarding. Definitely, that is a good one, and we have an entire HR webinar dedicated to kind of showing you how that works, and we have even built out more automation to that, and have some really neat new features that are available as well. Onboarding new employees, popular. A retirement distribution workflow. Definitely, that would be a good option. Internally here at Cities Digital, we have our simple IRA contribution and sign up all automated with workflow. Special event permit routing. Definitely, we see that a lot of times in cities, special events. So somebody wants to reserve a park space within your city or your county. You can leverage Laserfiche to help you do all of that. Additionally, parade permits. I mean, cities have their, local 4th of July parade or their county fair. You can, and a lot of times there's parades and you have to coordinate that. And so you could leverage Laserfiche Workflow and forms to build out a parade process. And we've done that before. We use it to move all of our technical information reports into a proper project folder and name and add metadata to it. Saves lots of time. I believe it. That's exciting. We have a hardware request form with forms into Laserfiche for archiving and updating a SQL for exit information. That's another great one as part of the offboarding process. Somebody needs to have a checklist for collecting all of the appropriate items that were dispersed to employee throughout their employment. If you don't have a checklist, how do you know what to collect from them? And you can automate all of that in Laserfiche. We got another one here. I use workflow via forms custom tab to update document metadata. This allows employees to update metadata without needing a full named user license. Well, that is interesting, and I think I would be interested to learn a little bit more about that. So lots of good ideas here. I got a screenshot of some questions now. And again, I will go through the list of submitted workflow ideas or what you're currently using. And the first 5 submissions, I will go ahead and reach out to you after the webinar and get you set up with a CPP course. And definitely thank you everybody for sending in your feedback. But let me go ahead and just switch to my next slide that solely says questions. Very important. And then I will take a look at these questions that were submitted. All right. And if I don't get to them because again, my technical difficulties, I have to access this in a slightly different way. If I don't respond on the webinar, I will definitely reach out afterwards as well. So will adding an annotation to a document make it a new version? No, it will not. It will just add the annotation to that existing entry ID. So it will not make it a new version. To be able to set records management properties, do you have to have the records management component? That's a great question, and yes, you do. Using the records management tool activities does require the records management component. Do you know if it has the ability to interact with Quick Agenda? So an integration to Agenda Quick. So an integration to Agenda Quick is not something I personally am familiar with, but I'm sure my team is. So I will double check with them and get back to you on that. Next question. Do the notifications get stored in Laserfiche automatically? And if so, where? So if you want the notifications to get stored in Laserfiche, you do have the ability to configure that. Depending on which type of notification you're talking about specifically, If it's an email notification that goes out, Laserfiche has a tool called Import Agent that allows you to archive any of the emails that are coming into your system and pull them into Laserfiche. So you could and would have the option to do that, but I will definitely follow up to kind of get a little bit better idea of what you're looking for. Does wait for entry change have any resource issues? If you have many documents waiting for a change, will we see some sort of decrease in performance? That is a possibility if you have the documents all getting changed at the exact same time. So if you have hundreds of documents that somebody goes through and just highlights them all and says approved all at the same time, you may see a slight delay in your performance, but that's kind of also dependent on the server resources that you have configured and set up for your workflow engine. A lot of times if organizations are leveraging workflow pretty heavily, they have the workflow engine stored on a separate server so that if the resources are pretty much hogged up by the workflows that are running, it doesn't necessarily bog down access to finding and retrieving documents by users. So it's kind of dependent on how you're having it set up. And if you are experiencing issues, definitely reach out and let us know. How do we know if we have records management? That is something we can definitely reach out and assist with, and then kind of go from there to ensure it's something that you have, or maybe get you set up with it. All right, so at this point, we've gone a little bit over. Again, any other questions that I maybe haven't addressed, I will definitely go through the list after the webinar is over and reach out, as well as send those CPPs. And then again, as always, your feedback is very valuable to us, so please take a moment after this webinar to fill out the quick survey. And then next month, we are going to be doing an unveiling of new features to our DocuSign integration. So we'll go through DocuSign licensing, what it can do, what it is, and then how to integrate it into your processes within Laserfiche. So that'll be Thursday, August 22nd at 1 p.m. Central Time. So hopefully we'll see you there. But otherwise, thank you again for your time. I apologize for the brief technical difficulties at the beginning. Technology is great when it's working. Thanks, everyone.